Hi, Louise.
Yeah, hi there.
Hi. Well, Louise has been one of my guests on the Earth Mystery Show many times, and she's one of my, maybe I should say, my favorite psychic. And she proved her psychic ability to me many years ago when she came to town to do a seminar, and she gave me a reading. And I've told this story every time she's on the air, so forgive me, Louise, but some people haven't heard of this story before. But you read for me, and you named some people that were hanging around me wishing me well, and the names meant nothing to me at all. My father, who was alive at the time, I went and told him about the reading, and I mentioned Blackie, and he said, "That's my brother." You know, his nickname for his brother was Blackie. And you mentioned, I can't remember the other people, but there were at least three people who I didn't know, and my father identified each one of them as like my grandmother, my uncle. These people were all dead, so I didn't know them personally, but apparently they knew enough about me to hang around and wish me well, and you identified all of them. So I thought, there's not many psychics who can call up names of dead people that you don't even know.
That's really funny. Well, first of all, I posted on my Louise Hauck Illuminations public Facebook page a picture of us in 2001, and I think you started interviewing me when I was on it, even though it's all an illusion. But the funny part, another example of what you just described, your story, a client once said, "So how do I know that you're not picking up on information in my own energy field when you tell me about a loved one in the non-physical?" Of course, we weren't using that term in those days. And I said, "Well, your uncle's here, and he's projecting something about people laughing, toothpicks, and a turkey." So of course, she had no reference to that. But then when she checked in with her mom, she said, "Oh, that was your uncle, who always used to come to Thanksgiving dinner, and I would hide the toothpicks because he was so gross in the way he'd pick his teeth at the table." And so my client knew nothing about that. So, sometimes it's just a good way of confirming, even though they and I don't need to be tested. But it is fun that it really isn't all in the airwaves.
Well, you don't need to be tested, but so many people are skeptic of psychic abilities on anybody's part. If I say to somebody I'm having a psychic on my show, the first thing I get is the eyes rolling and, "Oh, yeah, sure."
I know. But I think it was Raymond Moody. We were both speaking on a cruise years ago, and I think he really started the whole near-death deal. I forget what his book was, Life After Death, something like that. And I remember him saying that skeptics really aren't skeptics, or they wouldn't be asking questions. That's
a good point.
Yeah.
Skeptics,
yeah.
Well, if somebody just flat out rejected you, then obviously they wouldn't be a skeptic. They'd be a denier or something.
Yeah, or at least they're open. I guess maybe you could call them an agnostic skeptic or something like that. A metaphysical agnostic. Anyway, it's always great to be with you.
Well, I've been thanking new members, and there's one online right now who just called up. His name's Rudy, and he just called up to become a new member.
Terrific.
So this is a pledge show. I told Louise normally I would have the lines open so people could call her and ask questions, but since it's a pledge show, if you call 265-9555, you'll get an answering person, like myself I was on earlier, and they don't connect here in the studio. But if you do have a question for Louise, call up and pledge some dough for the pledge drive and submit your question, and the phone answers will bring it back, and we can do it over the air without you personally talking to her. But that number is 265-9555, and we appreciate your contributions to the station. And Louise, I really appreciate the books you gave us for pledge premiums. Louise has a couple of really good books. One's called Fearless Future, A Map Through an Uncertain Present by Louise Hauck. And the other one's called Streaming Consciousness, A Current of Unity by Louise Hauck. And both of these books are yours for a pledge of $89.50. One of them's yours for a pledge of $60. But what we really want is an angel or two, and an angel is $1 a day. And you can have it taken out of your account at the rate of $1 a day. And I spend more on tea bags every day than $1. So it means nothing to you, but it means the world to us. For a public community radio station to stay on the air requires the listeners. And Louise, thank you so much for donating these books for our pledge drive. They're really good books.
Oh, of course. Yes.
So I've got a question for you that I've asked several other people that might be outside your ken, but I don't think so. Do you know what the Mandela effect is? Have you heard of that?
Yes. An apprentice of mine alerted me to it. It's quite puzzling, isn't it? In fact, I was on tour last summer or late spring, and I was staying at his place in Indianapolis. And he pulled out, he showed me an example, and he pulled out a copy of Beyond Boundaries, my very first book. And there was some reference I'd made to a story I was telling about my son getting left behind at a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. And in those days, I think it was called Chuck E. Cheese.
It was called Chuck E. Cheese.
Pardon?
It was Chuck E. Cheese.
Right, but in the book, it says Chuck E.'s Cheese.
Right.
And we just sort of stared at each other agog, like, when did that change? So I don't know.
Well, let me back up and explain to the listener who doesn't know the Mandela effect. Nelson Mandela had tuberculosis. He died in prison in 1991 of tuberculosis. His wife took over for him. She was accused of bribery for a soccer team. She was all over the news as bribery, had bribed a soccer team to lose or win. And it was really accepted at the time that Nelson Mandela died of tuberculosis in prison. And then he pops back up alive and dies in 2013. So the Mandela effect is something that we all know happened, but seems like it didn't. The most easily identifiable of all is James Earl Jones said, "I am your father," in the Star Wars movie. Well, everybody remembers that, including James Earl Jones. He shows a picture of the script on YouTube where it says in his own handwriting, "Luke, I am your father." And in the movie now, it doesn't say any such thing. We all remember it, but it doesn't say any such thing now.
I know. It's pretty bizarre, and the best I can wrap around it is that there are so many alternate realities or different potentialities floating around out there beyond time, and that it could be a bleed through from an alternate reality dipping in. And that's the best I can interpret. And the alternate reality idea becomes very useful if I'll try to find a good segue here, and I don't mean to shortcut what you're saying about the Mandela effect.
No, I was leading into alternative realities. That's where we were going with it.
I must be intuitive.
It must be.
Or else we already had the conversation before we're having it.
Right.
But when I merge with another's consciousness, and just that, the ability for us to merge with each other to greater and lesser degrees is fascinating to me. I mean, I think we merge when we piggyback on each other's frequency and have an experience like what's it called? The crowd videos on YouTube that make you all teary because we're all one.
I miss those.
And I think those are, it'll come to me. And I think those are examples, very mild examples of when we unite, when we get on the same frequency. And listen to those words. Quite literally, we hop onto each other's frequencies. But when I merge with a client and can go anywhere in time, when I go to the past and see through their eyes at a strategic moment, we're there. We are there beyond time. And we reframe the scene, shift the relationship to that event, and then I pull a thread to the future to see what's new and different as a result of that shift. So in a way, we've created an alternate reality. And I think it was Seth, who channeled through Jane Roberts, who said that if you meditate on a different choice you would have made in the past every day for a few minutes, that within 30 days you'll start to get a bleed through from that alternate reality. And so I see bleed throughs, as I call it, when I go to the past with a client and shift something, or even to a past deathbed scene. I don't call them past lives because all of time is occurring simultaneously out there, so I call it other life spaces. So when I view these deathbed scenes that sort of hydroplane in and float over the present, if there's something that relates to what's going on in the present, as opposed to ego fluff, to tell the client they were someone famous or exciting because their present life's so boring. Those deathbed scenes are very telling, and it's sort of a video of them on their deathbed scene talking to us in the future. and saying, now that you're empowering yourself as a woman, I can die in peace. And you can speak your truth now, even in divorce court. I can die in peace because I was so suppressed as a woman. Or the landowner who taxed the peasants and amassed a great fortune, who might be dying in peace and sees that his future self has the potential to learn and grow and discover his true identity that has nothing to do with his possessions, as the future self might have lost a whole chain of Kmart stores or convenience stores, to learn that he's more than his possessions. So those deathbed scenes, when we shift that, it's almost like that past self shows us what's new and different as a result of having reframed it. And it's really sad, the people who reach me who truly want to change the past. And my son, my producer, webmaster, he said, Mom, watch it. If you call yourself a time-traveling clairvoyant, there are going to be people who think you've got a time machine. And it's really true. A client in South Korea was suicidal because he'd been fired from his job with a large corporation, and of course that culture exacts a lot of shame. So we went back to the day that he was fired, and his non-physical grandfather, the only one he had really felt unconditional love from, came with us. So he and I are there. He and the grandfather and I are there, standing behind him in spirit at his cubicle, just before he's about to get fired in the past. And I'm seeing the photo of a sunset. So we truly are there beyond time. And I see the boss come in, his shirt's kind of stretched across his belly, and he's about to fire my client. So we have to trust those events that occurred for our growth. You never know what synchronization, what configuration is in place to take us different directions. So but I encourage the client to experience that day, that firing, in a different way. So this time, when he got fired, with the support of the grandfather and me standing behind him etherically, he stood up, packed up his things, and walked out with his head held high. And the grandfather said, and if you go back into shame and fear and all of that, meet with me in the forest. In other words, in meditation. And sure enough, that's where he used to sit with his grandfather and really felt unconditional love. So we really created an alternate reality. And then I was encouraging him to watch for the bleed-through effect into the present, if he could feed that past moment. And I think you've heard me say that I can almost hear a click when people go from their more intuitive, creative, imaginative right brain back to their left brain, logical, rational mind. And so we're closing in Skype, and then all of us, he looks changed. He looks expanded. I can feel when people are thinking thoughts and holding on to certain beliefs that contract them, and then it's like or fear particularly, and then it's like they're in the corner hovering, and the universe can't find them to deliver the goods. But I could feel him expanded with these new insights and how we had essentially changed the past, his relationship to the past. But then, click, he went back into his head and said, how do we know that really happened?
I bet you hear that every day.
Oh, gosh. That click, it's so telling. And then, of course, my ongoing challenge is how to get people out of their heads and back into their hearts, because that's the conduit. That's the conduit, the love, the heart, that connects us eternally. But if they're in their head, they're not going to hear it. And I think you've also heard me use the example of the Tinkerbell picture on the website, media gallery picture of Tinkerbell, taken by a dear friend I met through your friend and my friend, Pat Barentine, who lives in your area. And Inky is one who has eyes to see these things, a sense of wonder about life, a real positive, childlike imagination. And she saw this fairy, this elemental, on a poppy across her living room. And she said, you're so beautiful. Will you stay there a minute while I take your picture? And she reaches into the cabinet down below for her point and shoot, takes a picture. It came out on film. You can see the rainbow reflection of its wings and kind of a vapor trail where it's been.
Cool.
So that's sort of my intuitive Rorschach test. And showing it in a workshop in London, very logical-minded left brain fellow, analytical fellow. And again, let me just say, we don't want to put down the brain. It's a marvelous computer that lets us interact with our physical world. But he looks at it and he says, oh, yes, that's the light refracting and blah, 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 blah. And then I said, now look at it through your little boy self-size. And then I hear a click and he says, oh.
Oh.
So it shifted his reality. It's a beautiful picture. And in the way that the dots connect beyond time, I was recently reading a phone reading, I think she was in London, and her cats popped in. You know, people's everything's energy, everything communicates, people's cars, houses, pets, trees, that want to thank them for the hug. They all have something to say, and pets usually pop in right away. Well, her 2 cats popped in, and they both had distinct, different personalities, and one really wanted to run the show. And so at the end, after the phone consultation, I was preparing the recording, the link to her recording, and I got that same cat that popped in and said, hey, include that link to the picture of Tinkerbell, would you? So I did, and the client emailed back and said, oh my gosh, OMG, I was looking at the picture of Tinkerbell, and my cat jumped up on the computer and was staring right at it. And her cat's name is Inky, and Inky is the name of the gal who took the picture of Tinkerbell. Doo-doo-doo-doo.
Wow. Wow.
And that's when I get all giggly, you know, how all the dots connect beyond time.
Our guest on the Earth Mystery Show on KVMR 89.5 FM, Nevada City, KCPC Camino, is Louise Hauck. And Louise has been kind enough to volunteer several of her books for premiums. If you'd like to call 265-9555 and pledge your support for the Earth Mystery Show or any other show on KVMR. The books I have in my hand are one called Streaming Consciousness, A Current of Unity, and the other one's called Fearless Future, A Map Through an Uncertain Present. These are both great books by Louise. You can tell from her talking, you know, her books are going to be good. And I also throw in an offer to go to lunch with Haines if you pledge. So for a pledge for me for lunch, $89.50, and for the books from Louise, 2 for $89.50, 1 for $60. And I'm sure that if you put this on a credit card with the monthly installment, you won't even know it's missing. If you do $89.50, that's what, $7 a month. That's nothing. So I think everybody that's listening should call 265-9555 and help us keep live on the air. And thank you so much, Louise, for helping us with this pledge show. Louise, we mentioned just briefly the Mandela effect. There is a bit of fear, and I know you discuss fear in your books. There's a bit of fear that Donald Trump's going to start World War III and blow us all up. And I share that fear, I guess, as much as anybody. And what do your people from the other side tell you about the future? That something like that would be such a big event. I'm sure it must ring. It must register on the other side. Do the people that are on the other side have anything to say about the possibilities of that,
I don't think
or not?
I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're quite watched over. And in the way that in consultations, I do a lot of mediating higher self to higher self. And I encourage clients when they want to reach out on this higher level of resolution to make sure they've gone to their higher self so that it's not their ego self trying to impose their will. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do the same and connect to Donald Trump's higher self. But I realized that when I found myself wanting to give him a dope slap, I realized I probably hadn't gone up to my higher self. So I tried again. And you just pull your energy up and imagine a ball of light above your head, again above the fray, above the ego self's agenda, above my Edith ego. And this time I saw him turn to me, his higher self, dressed as a clown, and he winked. I really think he's serving a purpose to unearth all that needs to be healed, all that has been in denial, the misogynistic, patriarchal, greed, the dishonesty, the lack of authenticity. I think it really has had to get amplified, and boy, isn't it, to know what needs to change. So I think he's playing a role, and I don't think, I think one thing that confirms it is how incredibly outrageous it's all getting, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was going to say, things have gotten so bizarre, it's like, you know, even if I put my tinfoil hat on and my Groucho Marx nose and glasses, and close my eyes and try and imagine things, it can't get any weirder.
Well, I think one thing that'll help, and I know a lot of people have kind of PTSD-ish symptoms. They're still not over the shock, and people are losing sleep, and it's really playing with our serenity, our inner peace. And I think what might help is just to remember that the darker it's getting, the closer we are to the illumination, to that greater authenticity, to that higher frequency. And that, so again, each time we get more information which is all the more outrageous, we have to think that we're getting closer to the illumination, to, the dark getting darker as the light gets so much brighter. And even those who aren't spiritually awakened, I think it's going to give the contrast of what is in truth and what is not, so that even unconsciously, people will be more drawn to the light, like moths to the light. I think what resonates in the soul, that authenticity, that truthfulness, is going to become more and more seductive, enticing, embracing. So that's where when I think we're going to see people turn. But we're all here playing it out, and even those who voted for him for whatever reason, it kind of transcends the drama, this whole play, because the heart knows authenticity. The soul recognizes truth. And so that's where I think the good news is it's getting so dark that the illumination is going to be pretty amazing. And it only takes a pinhole, just a pinhole of light to illuminate a whole room. So
do you have any time frame, and does that come through to you, or is your guests on your side are timeless, but on this side of the veil, what time frame do you think we're talking about?
Now, I don't know if it's my will or hopefulness. I something in August, September, and again, I get progressions of things, but not in terms of time. Occasionally. I might get, like August, September. But again, it could be wishful thinking, but that's what's popped in. I think there's going to be a lot uncovered, unearthed. And so, it had to be something this dramatic and outrageous for it to have its effect and for it to amplify all that is not in truth. So I think also with the election of Macron yesterday, I know one commentator has speculated that the way Europeans feel about our president is helping turn the tide against nationalism, bigotry, and all of that. So we just have to hold that space. We have to hold that thought and feed it. You've heard me discuss the fishhook technique, where you can imagine yourself tossing out a fish hook to a point in the future. I do it with apprentices. We call it Future Fridays. And if they have things they need to have done, like a report submitted or their place cleaned up, whatever, we toss the fishhook out to the following Friday, and we go there and experience it as if it's a reality, as if it is done. And one apprentice in Chicago needed to have his place cleaned up. And so there we go to the future, and there I am in his place where I've never been. I could feel his nice leather chair that kind of went poof, when you sit on it. And he's looking into the kitchen, and it's all cleaned up. And so I bring them into that future moment, feeling it, not intellectualizing it. And I can tell again when people go into their left brain. Well, of course, I'd have my books organized. They'd have my old clothes boxed up. And I said, no, I want you to feel the effects of all that done. So hard to get people from their heads into their hearts sometimes. So I'll say, think a thought about your pet or how much you love your kids, whatever. And then I wait, and then I can usually feel the moment that happens, that they come into the present. Anyway, so I encourage them to feed that future moment. So this fellow, Future Friday, I'm seeing his place all cleaned up, few little details. I think there was something macrame hung on the wall, whatever. Well, it happened. He reported his next apprenticeship session. It happened, and he'd been in the kitchen doing the dishes, looked down on the floor, and he just sort of felt spontaneously inspired to maybe clean the floor, and then, maybe I'll clean the dishes. Well, then maybe. So it just snowballed. When I had initially seen the garbage bags about to go out the door that Future Friday, I said, I promise I won't look through your trash. But so we can do that with our country. we can go to a future point, and it can just sort of be almost like a sci-fi planet or something or other floating around out there, that we kind of step onto it and feel, oh my God, feel all of this in the past. Oh my gosh, look what it took. People are being honest with each other. We're beyond competition now, and the patriarchal thing is just the old way, and people are thinking for themselves, all for one, one for all. So that's what we really have to do. We have to feed that potential future as if it has occurred, because I truly think it's going to. And I get a lot of confirmation from, I call it the big M, the big J, that's Mother Mary, Yeshua, GM, or AM, that's Archangel Michael. Some religious folk think I'm being irreverent by referring to them that way, but it's to convey how accessible they are. And as I say, the angelic realm, really confirming they were right there, when you opened your heart. Over the holidays, for example, I'm chatting with a client who can't sleep at night because she and her husband got a letter that her son was about to be dropped out of college, first grades. And she's so worried about it. And so I merge and I see through her eyes, and I can see all these music notes around her son. She said, yeah, he's a cellist, and he's thrilled he just got invited into the local symphony. I said, that's where his heart is. And I could see that he's likely to circle back around. I don't know whether it was going back to school. Only time will tell. And the universe is far more creative than our imaginations can stretch. So I tell my clients, don't even try to pin down this future information I'm describing. So I saw the likelihood of him circling back around, and then I felt the big J right next to me. Nothing but unconditional love from that energy. And whenever he projects a stained glass window, that means church. So I said to the client, were you in church recently? She said, well, yeah, it was the Christmas Eve service. I said, did you feel Yeshua show up beside you? Well, gosh, yes. And it was when my son was playing his solo, and he was playing from the heart. And I said, and you were hearing him from your heart. And that dialed in Yeshua, and he was right beside you. So later she emailed me and she said, I'm so grateful. I'm so glad that Jesus showed up for you. I said, no, Yeshua showed up to confirm that he had shown up for you. And it was simply the heart frequency. So I see, the big M, or Archangel Michael. Years ago, I'm finishing with a client in South America, and we're closing, and I said, there's an angel with an M showing up, wants to confirm you were what? Flying with the angels? Oh, see. And I said, could you fill me in? And she said she'd been on a turbulent plane flight, and people were crying and anxious and scared, and she relaxed and said, Archangel Michael, I want to fly on your wings. And she was, and she didn't want the flight to end. So these are all energies that are so right there with us, and all we have to do is open our heart. So when you go toss out the fish hook to a future moment, I don't know, shall we call it maybe next fall or whenever, when all of this, it's not controlling, it's not playing God and controlling things, but it could even be a little more nebulous, but out into a future moment where all of this has healed and come to the surface and been skimmed off, and we can be ourselves and all those wonderful things we've been promised. So to feed that future moment, but from the heart. Again, when we go into fear, we contract, and the universe can't get in. It can't send in those delicious serendipitous synchronicities. So I'm often encouraging or showing clients how to shape in a new response to an old trigger. I learned that from my behavior mod days when I used to teach behavior mod to psych techs working with developmentally disabled children. And so when we get triggered, like the next thing we see about what agency, is being demolished and what people won't have fun, whenever we get those shocks, to try to remember to take it in, but then flip to open our hearts to that future moment where all of this will have transformed. And then pretty soon it'll become automatic. So that's
pretty good advice. Pretty good advice.
Yeah. It's conditioning in a new response to an old trigger, and the triggers are abundant, as we know. Wow.
I'm changing the topic a little bit on you.
Yeah.
Bob Monroe, I had him on my show many, many years ago. I dearly love the man. And he was talking about love, and he was talking about if you say to somebody, I'll love you forever, let's say it's a mate, and let's say you're dying or they're dying, and you say, I'll love you forever, I'll wait for you on the other side. He said, don't ever say that, Haines. And I said, well, why not? He says, how many times do you think you've lived and died? How many mates do you think are waiting on the other side? And,
oh, that's funny. But, it's funny that you're saying that. When I was living in Boulder, I was reading a gal, and I said, there's a Bob sitting on a bench, and I don't call it the other side anymore because it's not a place. In the non-physical, of course, then I said the other side, who wants to tell you he's sitting on a bench. She said, that's Bob Monroe. I used to work at his center. What is it called? The
Monroe Institute.
Yeah, the Monroe Institute.
Fauquier, Virginia.
She said, I used to work for him. He was devastated when he lost his wife, and when we used to take clients on astral trips to meet with loved ones in the non-physical other side, sitting on a bench. So here in her session, Bob Monroe showing up saying, hey, I'm on the bench with my wife. So that kind of contradicts what he told you.
But, well, he was speaking generically, I think, not of his own wife.
Sure, absolutely.
But how many times, since there is no time, how many times do you think we incarnate? I mean, how many? Because you mentioned earlier in our talk today that someone was kind of bored with a nothing life. They're bored with this life. They're not accomplishing anything, not meeting their goals. How many lives are like that? How many lives are just boredom and not accomplishing anything does a person have? And are those meaningless, or do we only relate to the lives where we shone with a bright star?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, different aspects of our soul particles, our timeless soul, a greater or lesser density of those soul particles can reincarnate, which is why 30 people can be convinced they were Cleopatra. So we can be a greater or lesser density of a soul particle personality. So we can be really all over the map. And it's really not in terms of numbers. It's almost like a gravitational pull. When the right configuration of time and place and souls can come together for everyone to grow, usually by challenging each other. Ex-husbands are great for that, cantankerous bosses, great for that. But when that perfect configuration comes together, then I feel it can pull us back into the physical to play it out. I know I've heard one or more psychics say that, I think maybe it was Sylvia Brown, that children who pass over grow up, they get older on the other side. And that doesn't resonate for me because we're timeless. Our soul is timeless. And loved ones in the non-physical project things, specific moments from 50 years ago. So we're really kind of stuck in having to perceive this third-dimensional reality, time-oriented reality in terms of sequential time. But it really is only in this unique reality. You've heard me mention the fun example or the fun quote that time is nature's way of keeping everything from happening all at once. We would see it as all floating around out there, as I do when I do consultations, as opposed to being able to pay attention and get all engaged with what's happening with Trump and, gee, what's going to happen tomorrow, or I can't believe what he did yesterday. So it's how we can sort of march in place in this reality. So there could be an aspect of me playing itself out in a whole other life space. In fact, it's interesting. Sometimes I hop onto that frequency, and it's all in the airwaves. And a couple of times, for example, I have found myself in situations I can't even identify with. And one was years ago finding myself at a bridge in a bridge game, sitting next to someone named Alfred, and I knew I was living in an upstairs bedroom with flowered wallpaper. I don't know an Alfred, and I'm not fond of playing bridge. I don't play bridge. And so that was quite quizzical because I couldn't relate to that scene at all. So I figured some aspect of me was playing bridge, sitting next to someone named Alfred. or I was simply dipping down and inadvertently merging and experiencing that reality. And another time I found myself standing behind a farmer in Montana in the snow, hammering fence posts into the ground. Like I was just sort of eavesdropping. You've heard my fun story about the gal in Ireland who kept leaving her body at night and going to this house that she loved. And for 2 years, she went around Ireland looking for the house, hoping she could, I think, see that it was for sale. Finally, they find the house, she and the realtor. They go up the front walk, and the owner comes to the door and looks at the gal and says, "It's her! It's the ghost!"
Oh, yeah.
She'd been appearing as an apparition,
right.
leaving her body and going there. So we're just in a much more dense reality, but really doing very much what our loved ones in the non-physical are doing. Our thoughts in the non-physical are our reality instantly. And sometimes there have been more than one client's loved one who takes us on a tour of their heaven. I visit golf heavens, poker game heavens, war buddy heavens.
I think I told you on our show, one of our last shows, that I went and visited one of my dear friends in golf heaven. That's where he went and said,
yes. There are quite a few in fishing heaven, and I often quote my sister-in-law who said, "Well, then I'm going to land in a See's candy store," and that's why it's so important to monitor what we carry in our consciousness and what takes more of our time, the thought cycles we get into that kind of own us, and to simply pay attention, or Deepak Chopra calls it becoming the non-evaluative observer. The minute we observe, oh my gosh, that's just my thoughts, and then pull out. Eckhart Tolle teaches us that we've observed that our ego self's running the show, or that we've gone into fear or gone into a thought cycle. Just that we observe that means that we've pulled out and we're back to our authentic self. When we get the phone call, the parking place, bada bing, bada bang, etc. So it's all what we carry in our consciousness.
I think it was Seth that said, if you want to know your future, look at your own thoughts for 1 minute.
Oh, I know. I know. Every morning I get up and I do a 360 and I look out at my view and I give thanks for it. I open my heart, and then I just add a couple more ingredients to add to the mix, as if it's already there. So I'm giving thanks for any little increments, little ditties that are missing from what I'm already feeling grateful for. And there's something for everyone to feel grateful for. And it could seem quite banal, or, especially in times of loss and challenge, there's something to feel grateful for. And, the times I've been really challenged, I think to myself, well, what else would I be doing on planet Earth? We don't come here to live a perfect life. We come here to be challenged and then grow from what we do with the challenge, how we choose to embrace it and learn from it. And then we get that little insight and move on to the next challenge. So I think we'd be pretty disappointed if we went to the light and looked back and saw that we were really good at pretending at making it all perfect.
Well, your fish hook to the future technique, I didn't mention gratitude, but you just mentioned gratitude now. But in that technique, isn't the most important part of that feeling the gratitude of what you want to happen?
Absolutely, but it's hard for some people. People really stuck in their left brain, in their analytical, logical mind, will think a thought about a feeling as opposed to feeling a feeling. And that's where I'm always looking for different ways to take them from their head into their heart, to feel the feeling. And unfortunately, so many people have disassociated from feelings because they were too painful in the past, where there's been abuse or things they want to forget. So they shut down from feelings and from their heart, sometimes to protect themselves. So I like to kind of catch them off guard sometimes with what I'm shown, a moment from the past. One fellow, gosh, I merged with his timeless consciousness, and he's 8 years old. We're in the backyard, and we're waiting for Dad to come down the back steps to play ball. But oh my gosh, the conditions have to be perfect. He has to have not been drinking. He has to have not been fighting with Mom. And I said, and did you used to wait for your shift to come in, thinking of the metaphor? And he says, I was literally waiting for Dad's ship to come in. He was in the Navy. So we're in the backyard, we're waiting, and while we're waiting, we toss the ball to the dog. I tell you, I felt his energy go from contracted to suddenly filling the room. And he said, oh my gosh, I forgot. That's the last time I ever felt joy.
With the dog.
Tossing the ball to the dog. So I said, you need to bring that little boy self along with you. He brings imagination, optimism, vitality. This fellow was having a hard time walking, a lot of health issues. And then a week later, his wife emailed and said, Frank's walking more briskly now. He's walking better. He had sort of revivified his spirit, or his little boy self, welcomed him in. And I often tell clients, so pretend that your child self is sitting in the passenger seat and you're taking care of that child now. So, it's all there. And whatever can take a client into their heart, it just opens everything. That's when you get the synchronicities. But it's almost like people are daring the universe or a higher power to show that it's true. I dare you. Well, what if you're in that mode? Just try it on. Doesn't it close you off? Like, I dare you, because you're holding a certain position.
Yeah, that it can't happen.
Exactly. And recently, relative to that, I started feeling the difference between the two words, anticipation and expectation. Now, doesn't anticipation feel all bubbly and like night before Christmas, or like?
It's going to happen.
Exactly. And then if you shift to expectation, doesn't it close it down? Doesn't it?
Because we've had so many expectations that didn't happen. So what we learn from experience, don't expect too much.
But there's so much control involved with expectation itself.
Yep.
So I play with that too, because I can almost see an animation of all the bubblies or effervescence, almost like a glass of champagne when I think of anticipation, and then I go to expectation, and then it's like a walled-off corral.
Right. Our guest today on the Earth Mysteries show our show's almost over. This is a pledge show. Our guest is Louise Hauck, and Louise has volunteered a bunch of books for our listeners who pledge. One of them's called Streaming Consciousness, A Current of Unity, and the other one's called Fearless Future, A Map Through an Uncertain Present. They're both excellent. As you can tell from hearing her, there's a lot of good stuff, meat in these books. They're yours for a pledge of $89.50, or one for $60. I'd recommend getting both. And I'd recommend getting a live reading with Louise. So how do people do that? How do they reach you?
Well, just email me at louise@louisehauck.com. I'm getting on the road for a month on Wednesday. I will be in the Bay Area from the 10th. I'll be in the Bay Area. It's on my travel schedule. It's on the website.
And so the website's louisehauck.com?
Yeah.
And your last name is spelled Hauck. So Louise is Louise, just like it sounds. Hauck is Hauck. LouiseHauck.com will get you to Louise.
And I'll be up in Auburn. I think there's one or two consultations open on, I think, the 17th. I'll be at my niece's naturopath's office. And then one or two, I think, available when I'm back down to Mill Valley the following week, I think on the 20th.
And, of course, you can do these by phone also.
Oh, it works great by phone, yeah. And then we get right to it.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Louise, it's always so nice to talk to you, and always so nice to have you on the Earth Mysteries show. You're one of my favorite guests, and I think one of the listeners' favorite people to listen to. And the show always goes by like a blink of an eye. Blink of an eye. It doesn't take very long.
It's great. I love doing it. And do check out my recent post on Louise Hauck Illuminations Facebook. It shows a picture of you interviewing me in 2001. It's always great, Haines. Thank you so much.
Can I call you after the show?
Sure.
Will you be around for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple of things just to personal things. So please call 265-9555 while Louise is still around, and let us know how much you appreciate her being on the show and how much you appreciate KVMR in your life. I mentioned yesterday, I did a pledge show yesterday, I said, it speaks poorly for my social life, but KVMR is my best friend. I spend more time with KVMR than I do with any person, just about, except my wife.
Funny. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that KVMR is your best friend, and you will treat your best friend to lunch. How about lunch with Haines? That's one of the pledges, Don't have to pledge much to have lunch with Haines. You can be my best friend, too. Thanks so much, Louise. Always wonderful to talk to you. And I'll talk to you again in a few minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye. So Louise is just a wonderful person in life, a lifelong friend, and a person that you want to know in your life. And you can just go to louisehauck.com, find out where she is, how to do a personal consultation with her. It's really worthwhile, eye-opening, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show. And as I usually say to people before the end of the show, I don't usually say, please send money. I usually say, the power of love, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, there'll be world peace. So I'll say that as a goodbye today. And I'm going to go out with Brett Shady. Brett is a local artist who is just fabulous. If you've never heard Brett Shady or Golden Shoulders, you're in for a real treat.
Keep all the old days behind you, so you don't have to wonder where they've gone. Stay where the sadness can't find you till the sadness is done. Keep looking up for salvation, just in case it passes and what they believe is right. Even if all it provides is some sleep for the night. There's a girl in South Carolina, standing in the sweet summer wind. A girl in South Carolina that I'll never talk to again. Some East Coast landfill is covered in things that we've all thrown away, and it was just a cup of coffee at the end of the day. But there's a girl in South Carolina, standing in the sweet summer wind. A girl in South Carolina that I'll never stand by again. What did she want from me? Why does she care? I still think of her fondly.